I literally had my son, like my adult son, sit across the table from me and just stare at me and be like, and he was like, time over. Welcome to Pajamas and Wrenches, the podcast where we share warm fuzzies for your creative well and cool tools for your creative challenges. I'm PJ Gardner-Schweitzer, author of the Horace and Bunwinkle series and The Great Zudini from HarperCollins, and this is...
I'm Sarah Allen. I'm the author of What Stars Are Made Of, Breathing Underwater, Nightmare House, and the upcoming Monster Tree from FSG Macmillan.
Yay! Well, we're here today because we want to share our inspirations and our challenges and just get you excited to be creative. So, Sarah, you're going to start us off, right, with what has been inspiring you lately?
Yes, absolutely. And I have a fun one today. I have found myself watching a specific movie 3 times this week.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure how that happened, but it has been on my mind like all week, and I've been thinking about it, and it's definitely been something that's kind of filling my creative well and making me think specifically about character. And the movie is Marty. It's an old black and white movie from the 50s. I don't know why I love, well, we can kind of talk about why it works so well, why I love it so much, but it's like I said, an old black and white movie from the 50s about this 30-something butcher in New York who is, quote, like the fat, ugly man friend, and has kind of been that person in his friend group for the last decade. And we see him call up a girl for a date and get flat out rejected. And then, his friends and his mom are like, why aren't you married? Why aren't you married? Why aren't you doing all, And so to like kind of appease everyone, he goes to this dance hall, and it actually at that point it's the longest single shot scene in film up to that point. Is we see him in this really crowded ballroom talking with his friend, and the friend's like, hey, there's 2 girls over there, and then we see them walk all the way across the ballroom behind the crowd. The friend asks one of the girls and she says yes, and they go dance, and then Marty asks the other girl and she says no. And then we see him walk all the way back around the ballroom. And it's like heartbreaking. And then there's the girl who comes in and gets like flat out like abandoned by her date. And then Marty asks her to dance, and it goes from there. But it's such an interesting like look at these kind of forgotten type of characters.
I have seen Marty, and I love Marty. It's so what's funny is I remember the part that I remember so well because it has Ernest Borgnine. Didn't he win an Academy Award for it too?
Yeah, he did. And Betsy Blair, also the girl, won, or at least she was nominated for it too. Yeah.
It's one of the things is it's a character study. It's 100, right? And right. But one of the part that stood out to me was his mother, who wants him to find somebody. And then one of her friends talks about how terrible it is to have a daughter-in-law because right. And then she changes her tune, and she really does a disservice to her son, and the conflict of that, but it's all so human, right? So what is it, do you think that has you going back to it? Like, are there specific scenes or moments? What do you think has you going back over and over again to it?
Yeah. So the parts I find myself watching over and over, and I kind of like skip through the rest, is so Ernest Borgnine and Betsy Blair, their characters meet at this ballroom after she gets abandoned, and he goes out to like the balcony and asks her to dance, and she's crying, and then that's kind of the beginning of their night. And the ensuing date that they had, they just end up walking over the streets of New York for like 4 hours just talking. And I love the idea of these sort of forgotten sideline quirky characters kind of finding each other and kind of making each other feel validated and appreciated for the very first time. Like, she's been crying, and the first, they're dancing, and he's like, I just want you to know I'm having a really good time, and you're great. And she's like, thank you. And they're making each other, like, they've had how much heartache for the last however many years, and them kind of finding each other just like makes me squeak.
It's well, first of all, this obviously, like, we both write, currently we're writing, I have published children's books where there's
Right.
not a big opportunity to write a ton of romance. But
Yeah.
like, because it's funny, I'm in a very romance mood too, like
Mhm.
and so I really get that. But then it's not your leading man and leading lady getting together,
Exactly.
because
Exactly.
and anybody, but the idea also is anybody can be the leading man and the leading, right? Like,
Yep.
anybody
Yep.
and everybody deserves to be loved.
Mhm.
Um, they do, they wind up together. Wait, do we spoil it? Maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and they kind and they almost don't, because he has, after their date that's amazing,
mhm,
uh he has so much pressure from his friends and his mom, because his friends don't like the girl because she's not, quote, like pretty enough or whatever.
yeah,
And his mom, doesn't wants him to stay and take care of her. And
yeah.
finally he's like, you know what? Whatever. I had the best time I've ever had. So I'm gonna call her and beg her to go out with me again, and despite what anyone else says.
Because I remember, isn't there a part where, like, he sort of he drops contact with her and she's sitting at home and she's kind of devastated? Am I
Yeah,
remembering this
yeah,
correctly? Because I just
yep,
remember like almost feeling sick for her with
yep.
how much that had hurt her, because it was such a lovely time. But also how yeah, oh no, I love that movie. That's a great movie. I'm a big fan of old black and white movies too, but
Yeah, yeah.
there's a flavor to it. Do you feel like there's a specific project it's kind of building to, or is it sort of a general vibe to it?
Well, I think the reason I connect with it so much, because whether I'm writing like quirky romance, I am a little bit working on kind of a quirky romance at the moment, but in my middle grade too, like in anything I'm working on, I do find myself writing sort of the sideline characters. Um, they're always my favorites in the anything that I'm consuming in shows or books or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And pretty much every character that I write is sort of a character who, very much does exist on the fringe, or at least feels
Mhm.
like they're on the fringe, or for whatever reason. Um, you know, Even like my very first book is about a girl with a genetic disorder that she like feels kind of like socially a little bit isolated, and uh so I really just love writing and reading characters like that, and I think that's what draws me to this movie so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a relatability to it because most of us don't feel, or I should say maybe that most of us feel like that person who's not quite in the
Right.
circle, right? But no, I love that. I love that that's been inspirational for you. Now, okay, so anything else that's been inspirational with that? Or is like, has it led you down any other rabbit holes? Because I find usually I start with one place and then I kind of like, I go, oh, what else is there like this? And then I'm down a rabbit hole. Or has it been pretty much this consistently lately?
Well, I mean, I've been kind of doing a deep dive. Like I've been like looking up the history of Betsy Blair, and it was interesting because in this movie she's kind of, they call her, the word in the 50s was a dog, like she was the
Yeah.
dog, and like not pretty enough. But she was married to Gene Kelly when she was 17, and she had a kid with Gene Kelly, and then she got ended up getting divorced from him. But and then she was like a big name in kind of the Red Scare, where a lot of Hollywood people were being blacklisted.
Okay.
That was her. So, you know, in terms of the like historical research, that's kind of the rabbit hole I've been doing.
Well, no, because I think I do think that happens though, where like something inspires you and you want more like it, and something
Mhm.
inspires you and you want to know everything about it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so I think that sounds like where you're at with that particular.
yeah.
Uh,
And I was talking about it with a friend, and she was asking me, because I've been like squeeing about it to everyone this week for some reason.
I love it.
Um, and she was asking me not just what it was about, but like what would be a comparative movie. And I actually struggled to come up with one because I can't think of terribly many that are like it. And the closest one that I landed on,
Mhm.
and this brings up the whole thing of like, how do you comp something? Um, but the closest I could think of in terms of tone and like vibes, because it is historical, it's an older
Mhm.
movie from the 50s, black and white, was Harvey with Jimmy
Okay.
Stewart. And
Okay.
I don't, they're definitely not quite the same. Plot wise, they're not, they're very different. But in terms of this sort of like the like heartfeltness of
Okay.
them, and characters who are kind of
Yeah.
quirky and on the fringe,
Uh,
um, that was the closest I felt like I could come to any kind of comparison.
there is a movie I did think of that's funny, that's a
Oh,
little more recent, called Dogfight. And it had River Phoenix
oh,
and Lily Taylor. I think that's
okay.
and River Phoenix is with a group of soldiers, and I can't remember what branch of the military they were in. They're on leave, and the whole point is to get the ugliest girl. They call it a dog fight because you get the ugliest girl, and whoever gets the ugliest girl,
Oh,
right? And he meets Lily Taylor, who is in no way ugly. I always love in
right, right.
Hollywood, you're like,
Yeah,
she's ugly, and you're like, okay, if you say so, right?
yeah.
Suspension of disbelief. Right. And so he winds up taking her, and they're awkward. She's awkward, but they wind up forming a real connection, and then he gets shipped off,
Mm,
and he goes overseas, and it's Vietnam. It's during Vietnam, uh,
okay.
if I'm not mistaken, and it winds up being a sort of tender. He's not unattractive, but it is about that connection with someone that has more to do, where it's set up in a certain way, and you have certain expectations and all of this, and then it becomes about real connection and real
Yes.
intimacy, I think, because what is that 4-hour date where they're walking around the city, but intimate,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And and vulnerability, where you're just with someone, and it's fun, and
Mhm,
it's just the two of you, right? Like
mhm.
I think that's really cool. But I do think that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head that's in a similar vein. Also historical, in that it's
Mhm,
historically set,
mhm.
but also now historical because it's probably from the 90s,
Yeah.
not 10 years ago, no matter how much I try to think it is.
And it seems like these are all really good character studies. So if,
Yeah,
very good examples of diving into a specific character's experience in a very unsuperficial way, like
yeah.
truly getting at the depth of a character.
Do you want to know what actually I thought of too? It was so odd as we were talking about it. I thought of Gosford Park, and I thought of Mary. Oh, I cannot think of the actress's name now, but she's the Scottish maid to Maggie Smith,
Oh,
lady's maid to Maggie Smith, right?
okay.
And I don't know if they even call them maid, but you know what I mean? Like she's
Right.
superintendent, right? And Clive Owen, and how in this movie that was about everybody, to me, that their relationship in
Mhm,
this weird way, because she's sort of unassuming and all of this, and as servants they sort of have to be, but there's so much personality there. And anyway,
mhm.
but it was odd because I was like, is there anything in common? And I was like, I don't think so, but there was something, do you know what I mean? Like there was something in the vibe of Marty
Yes.
that reminded me of the vibe of that relationship in some
Yeah.
way. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Well, and anything with Maggie Smith is just gold. So,
Absolutely. Well, have you seen, there's a show, it's like Tea with the Dames or something like this, and it's on
oh, I
Hulu.
haven't watched it, but I've seen like it around.
I am dying to watch it because it's all those British old ladies that we've watched forever and we love.
Yes.
So Maggie Smith, Judi Dench, Joan Plowright, and I cannot think of the fourth
Yeah.
actress, but
I think I've
yeah,
seen a clip from it where they're all basically talking about how they only get roles if Judi Dench turns them down.
I love that. Yeah. So also another recommendation, the
Okay.
movie I can't think of the name of. Okay, so let's talk about some
Hmm.
challenges. And
Awesome.
I'll go this time.
Yes.
I'll talk about
Yes. Let's
challenges.
hear it.
Uh, so and for any creatives out there who are in the stage, perimenopause has been a super big challenge. Like I, for instance, last night was up for 2 hours in the middle of the night just because I got overheated and I couldn't
Mhm.
rest. And then my brain started going, and I kept thinking, you're doing the podcast tomorrow. You got to get it together and go to sleep. And my body was like, instead, we're going to combust. I actually think the big part, legitimately, the big part about perimenopause that has shocked me, that I do kind of like want to like make people aware of, is there's like this massive brain fog that kind of
Mm,
comes with it, where I will struggle to stay with a thought. Do you know what I mean? I will struggle
mhm,
um to be able to, like, sometimes I can't even follow the plot of my own stories. Like
mm,
I'll try to think about it and it just sort of slips away from me. And I felt really bad. And I kept thinking, oh, there's just something wrong with me. And then I've talked with a number of other writers who are in perimenopause or have gone through it, and they're like, no, that is the joy
ugh.
of the change. Uh, and that has been a bit of a challenge. I think what I had to do was go back. What I'm trying to do is go back to where I was when I had my kids. Like my first baby,
Mhm,
you when you're on your own, you just do whatever you're gonna do, right? But
mhm.
then you have the baby, you're not sleeping, and you're still dumb. Like pregnancy brain, you think, oh, once I have the baby, I'm not gonna have pregnancy brain anymore. And it turns out that lingers. You're like, oh, why are the keys in the freezer? Oh, that's why, right? But what I did is I had to really simplify, and I would be like, getting everything done tomorrow isn't an option. Getting three things done tomorrow might happen, and I
Mhm,
would I would be like, here are the three things, and the first one has to be done, and then everything after that, if it happens, it's great. And I've
mhm.
had to kind of go back to that mentality of simplify, which I don't actually think is a terrible way of living
No, not at
anyway.
all.
But yeah, so that's been, which I know is very specific, and for any dudes who might roll along, but hey, there are people. And I promise you, the early 50s-year-old women, are going through this. And if you're nice to them, you have a friend for life. So those,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
well, my question is, are there ways it I guess it's almost sort of like a surfer riding a wave, right? Like
Yeah.
are there ways that you can creatively actually use this and that I mean, that might not it is a challenge, right? Like how
Yeah.
do you use it? Like even, losing your train of thought, like recording into something and like
Right.
letting your train just go off the rails for a while or whatever. I
Well,
don't know.
what I have found for me personally, and I know this does not work for everybody, but I found that getting out of my house, which will
Mm,
start to feel like it's just too many pieces. I imagine it's a little bit like ADHD, where there's too many things around you that are calling your attention, and
mhm,
because it's so hard to focus. So I find that getting out of the house really helps me. And I'm actually more productive in a 2 hour visit to my problem currently is that I don't have a coffee house that I like. You know what I mean? Like a little place to go sit. So I go sit at Whole Foods, and it's
That's
not
awesome.
it's funny because they have free Wi-Fi in part too. But it's I always just feel like I roll up because I have this rolling suitcase I put my stuff in, and I feel like a pharmaceutical rep as I'm rolling in.
Nice.
And stuff. But a new coffee shop opened up in our neighborhood. The problem is I also don't want to spend money on coffee shop, coffee
Right,
every day or
right.
anything like that. But I do find getting out of the house is really helpful. That helps me focus. Um, Honestly, body doubling, I've done a lot of ADHD strategies. Body doubling.
Mm.
I literally had my son, like my adult son, sit across the table from me and just stare at me and be like, and he was like, time to work. And I was like, I don't want to. But he wouldn't let me not work, so I would do it. And then I paid him for it, but I can't afford to keep paying him because he's not cheap,
Right.
and I can't get the stuff done in a reasonable amount of time. But I do find though that body doubling is really helpful, which is sometimes like Zoom,
Mhm,
like writing
mhm,
sprints will help, getting out of the house. Um, I don't know that you can channel it. I do think you're right though. I think that the surfing metaphor is the best. You just ride where you're at,
mhm,
and
mhm,
you're productive where you can be. And the biggest thing, and I think this is true again, no matter what challenge you're facing, is to be kind to yourself. Because
mm,
if
mhm,
you could muscle your way through, if you could muscle your way through the situation, you would already have muscled your way through the situation, right? If you could just your teeth, right, and do it, you would already have done it. So something else is at play. I think that's to me been like the big reminder. Now, that is also big talk and something that is not, you know what I mean? I'm like, I say that I'm like, oh, give yourself grace. And then I don't. So we're all struggling with that, right?
right.
Yeah. So that's definitely Those are things that have been working for me. But again, I just think you just find strategies. Like whatever's
Mhm.
going on in your life, you just have to look around, and you have to be honest with yourself too. Like every day I'll be like, oh, I can get work done at my desk. And then I come sit at my desk and I watch something on my laptop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and I think anyone, whatever the source of the challenge, like whether it's perimenopause or not, I think strategies like getting out of the house and body doubling can apply to so many different things of just getting yourself motivated.
yeah.
Like ironically, I mean, I live 15 minutes from um Disney World, and ironically, I write by hand, and I write better sitting in like the little Italy section of Epcot than I do sitting at my desk.
I
Like
absolutely, yeah.
it's crazy.
And I live close to Disneyland, and we
Mhm.
will like one of my sons loves it, and we go there all the time. And I have a little nook that I will sit in as well. And I actually
Yeah.
discovered that they have a charger, like a
Yeah.
plug. And I was like, well, although I'm finding writing by hand actually kind of there takes so much pressure off when you write by hand,
It
right?
totally does. So, and also, if anyone needs to know where the outlets are at either Disney World or Disneyland, you know, you come talk to us.
We've done research. We've done. Okay, so we want to talk about, so what are some resources, right?
hmm hmm
So I actually have a favorite resource that I wanted to share, which is it's a YouTube channel called hold on, let me make sure I've got it right. Overly Sarcastic Productions. And I don't know,
I
have you
love it
ever
already.
heard of it? Okay, so excuse me, it's animated. They draw it, and it's red and blue, and I think they might have some other things. It's so there's a woman and she's red, and there's a man and he's blue, and they talk about different things like myths, like different story tropes and stuff like this. And they have a lot of the videos. And I think he talks more about factual stuff like history. But like I had a story that had like a time loop in it or time travel. And I watched Red did the video on that one. So I was like, and I'm taking notes. I'm like, okay, that is so helpful. And I was like, and it really, excuse me, it just really helped get some things clear in my mind, because I
Mhm.
actually have a son who's like never do anything with time travel. My oldest is like never do anything with time travel or time loops. Time is a terrible thing in stories. And I was like, you're crushing my spirit. And then I tried it and I was like, oh no, he's right. This is so hard because there's so much to figure out. But yeah, I love it. It's called Overly Sarcastic Productions. You can find them on YouTube, and they have a ton of videos, and they've got different playlists like with like the history or the tropes or myths. And it's super informative. And if you like to go down rabbit holes, you know what I mean, like info rabbit holes, this is a great place to start.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, and I have some words of wisdom for us to end on. And I'm gonna go with a classic, our good friend Stephen King. Because he has a quote that's one of my all-time favorite writing quotes about kind of just why we write. And it says, writing isn't about making money, getting famous, getting dates, getting laid, or making friends. In the end, it's about enriching the lives of those who will read your work and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over. Getting happy, okay? Getting happy. And I am naturally like happiness and joy is something I think about a lot, like in a very kind of particular way. And so I think the fact that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
greatest horror writer of all time is talking about how the purpose of writing is to make you yourself happy. I just love that so much. And I think like there's so many disappointments and so many like speed bumps along the way in terms of the business, especially, and the
Yeah.
creative side too.
Yeah.
So just kind of keeping that perspective of like, okay, but how like the priority in this is to enrich my own life and hopefully the lives of anyone else who comes across my work. So
Yeah,
there we
I
go.
think it's so true. I think the quality of your work suffers, not yours in particular, but one's work, right?
Yes.
When there's no joy behind it. And you can tell as a writer, you can tell when well, immediately you can tell because you've just written it. Later, after you've edited, you can't. You don't remember the
Yeah.
scenes that you were,
Yeah.
well, I mean, maybe a couple, but for the most part, you really don't remember. Um,
Yeah.
but I think you can tell when a book is sort of an obligation, right?
Yeah.
Versus when a book is a pleasure, right?
Yes.
I will
And
also
there's
say,
always work and
yeah,
challenge, but you can tell when it doesn't start from a place of happiness and joy, you
yeah.
know?
Could you read the quote again for me?
Sure, sure. Writing isn't about making money, getting famous, getting dates, getting laid, or making friends. In the end, it's about enriching the lives of those who will read your work and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over. Getting happy, okay? Getting happy.
So the part that struck me was enriching, right?
Mhm.
Enriching
Mhm.
lives, right? But here's what I've learned, not only as a consumer of story, but also as a producer of story, is that you do not get to tell anyone what enriches their life, right? Which is
Mhm.
why someone who writes horror can talk about enriching lives, right?
Yeah.
Because you just rewatched Marty 3 times in a week. Right? During the pandemic, I reread the same romance novel, I think 4 times. It was like anytime I felt unstable, I would go back to this.
Mhm.
And the truth is, people find joy, enrichment and pleasure, whatever they need in a book, in any book. And we don't tell them, it's not our job as the creators to tell them where to find those things, right?
Yeah.
And which
Yeah.
is why I think that quote is awesome on so many levels.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
Well, it does look like we are at the end of our program for today. This has been wonderful. As Sarah and I are so excited to just share all of our love of creativity and our ideas with you all. Sarah, is there anything you want to say before we close?
I'm just super excited about this. I love that we get to talk about warm fuzzies and cool tools. It's gonna be very exciting.
It is. Well, thank you all for joining us.